Montana Territory, August 1877. The boy was burning with fever when Zadie Collins pressed the back of her hand to his brow for the third time that hour, her heart pounding in panic. She shifted him closer to her side, wrapping the threadbare blanket tighter around his small shoulders. The wind outside their cave shelter howled over the Bitterroot Mountains, kicking dust into her eyes. She blinked it away and whispered, "Hold on, Vance." "Just hold on, baby." Zadie had been hiding with the boy for 3 weeks now, ever since she found him curled beside his mother's body in a burned-out wagon just north of the Flathead River. The woman had been dead for days. Vance had not spoken since. She never learned his last name, just that he was 5 years old, and the only thing left of someone else's family. Now he was hers. She had no kin, no home, and no plan beyond survival. She had known hunger before, known how to strip a squirrel and make broth from pine roots, but she had never known what it meant to keep someone else alive. Still, she tried. Every day she tried, but the boy needed more than she could give. His fever was getting worse, and the dried meat in her pack was nearly gone. The hills had turned from shelter to trap. Zadie stood slowly, her knees stiff from cold and crouching, and looked down the slope. She knew what she had to do. If she kept waiting, he would die. If she went down and begged a stranger for help, she might get shot. Her fingers curled around the small knife at her side. She would take the risk anyway. By dusk, she was moving through the trees like a shadow, Vance bundled against her chest, his head limp on her shoulder. She stumbled over roots, her boots soaked from a stream crossing, and her breath came in short bursts. Then she saw a cabin tucked low in a clearing, smoke rising from the chimney like a promise. A corral stood to the side, 2 horses within. Someone lived there. She tightened her grip on Vance and stepped out into the open, her voice raw as she shouted, "Help, please!" A door slammed open. A tall man stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. He had broad shoulders, dark hair falling across his brow, and a hard look in his eyes. His boots hit the porch boards heavy as he came down the steps. She did not stop walking. "He's sick," she said, her voice shaking. "He needs help. I do not have anywhere else to go." The man stared at her for a long moment, then he lowered the rifle. "Come inside," he said. "Quick." The cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee, but Zadie barely saw it. All she saw was the bed he pointed to, the clean linens, the basin of water he fetched without needing to be asked. "I will heat broth," he said. "Get him out of those wet things." She hesitated. He saw it and added, "My name is Isaiah Cooper. Just me out here. You are safe." Zadie nodded once. She set Vance down gently, peeled off his damp clothes, and wrapped him in the blanket Isaiah handed her. Isaiah worked silently beside the fire, pouring hot broth into a tin bowl. He handed it to her without a word, his eyes flicking between her face and the boy's. "What happened to him?" he asked finally. "Wagon attack," she said. "North of Trigo. He was alone. And you," she looked up at him, chin high. "I was passing through. I buried his mama. I could not leave him." Isaiah studied her for a long moment. "You did right." Zadie blinked, heat rising behind her eyes. She turned away. They stayed the night, then another. Vance's fever broke on the 3rd morning, and he started to speak again in quiet, broken words. He clung to Zadie's skirts and followed her everywhere. When Isaiah built a new cot by the hearth, Vance crawled into it without protest. Isaiah never asked questions he did not need to. He taught Zadie how to use the stove where he kept the sugar, how to draw water from the well. He fixed the shed roof with her help, showed her how to split logs without splintering the ends. One night after Vance had gone to sleep, she stood by the porch rail watching the stars. Isaiah stepped out beside her. "You planning to keep moving?" he asked. She looked over at him, the silver light catching the lines of his face. "I do not know where we would go," he nodded once. "You could stay if you wanted." Zadie turned fully toward him. "Why would you offer that? You do not even know me." He shrugged one shoulder. "I know you carried a half-dead boy down a mountain to save his life. That tells me enough." She stared at him, unsure what to say. Her hands tightened around the porch rail. Isaiah's voice was low. "You are not alone anymore, Zadie." The sound of her name in his voice made something soft break loose inside her. "I do not want to run again," she whispered. "Then do not," he said. "You are safe here." Inside, the oil lamp flickered. Vance stirred in his sleep, then settled again. Zadie looked back out at the stars. The night was quiet, but her heart was loud with something she had not felt in years, hope. And standing beside Isaiah, close enough to feel the warmth from his arm, she let herself believe in it. By early September, the first chill had crept into the mornings, silvering the grass and turning the edge of the wind. The cabin sat quiet in the half-light, its logs dark with dew, the stovepipe breathing a thin column of smoke into the brightening sky. Isaiah was already outside when Zadie stepped onto the porch, her sleeves rolled to her elbows and her braids still damp from washing at the basin. He was mending the gate latch with steady hands, his hat tilted back, exposing the sun-darkened skin above his collar. She paused, watching the easy rhythm of him, how he moved like he'd always known the land, how little he said but how much he offered. "You always up before the sun?" she asked, stepping down onto the packed dirt. He didn't look over. "Cattle don't wait." "Neither does the fence." She walked closer, stopping short of the gate. "You ever think of leaving this place?" He glanced at her then, his eyes catching hers with quiet weight. "No, I came here to stop running," she nodded slowly. "That's what I'm trying to do." He set the hammer down and leaned against the post. "You don't talk much about before. There's not much in it worth repeating." He didn't press. Instead, he bent to pick up the broken hinge and offered it to her. "Mind holding that?" She took it, the metal cold in her palm. "You fix everything yourself, mostly. Wasn't much use paying someone to do what I could learn with time." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like you." Isaiah replaced the hinge, the wood creaking under his weight. "You ever build anything?" "A trap once, for rabbits. It didn't work. I was hungry enough to try anyway." His hand stilled. "What happened?" "I carried it south, traded it for a loaf of bread. The man who took it said it was clever. I was 13. That was the first time I thought maybe I'd make it." Isaiah straightened, dusting his palms. "You're stronger than you look." "I've had to be." They stood in silence a moment, the morning heavy with the smell of pine and earth. Behind them, Vance's voice called faintly from inside. Zadie turned. "He's been waking earlier. Means he's healing." She nodded. "He asked me last night if we're staying." Isaiah watched her carefully. "What you tell him?" "That I didn't know yet." He didn't react, just picked up the tools and carried them toward the shed. She followed, her steps slow with thought. Inside the shed, the air was thick with cedar shavings and old leather. Saddles hung along the wall, neat and worn. She ran her fingers over one. "You ride often?" "Most days. There's work on every side of this place." "Sometimes I ride just to breathe." She turned toward him. "Would you teach me?" He paused, then nodded once. "When the boy's strong enough to stay with me while we're out. I want to learn to carry him better, not just survive." Isaiah's voice was low. "You already carry him. Not like you carry this place. You built this with your hands. I want to know how." He met her gaze for a long moment. "Then you will." That afternoon, Zadie split kindling until her arms ached. Vance stacked the smaller pieces in a careful pile, his brow furrowed. Isaiah watched from the porch, saying nothing, but when she looked up, he nodded once. Later, while the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of coals, she found Isaiah at the river's edge, skimming stones across the water. His coat lay folded beside him, his shirt sleeves soaked at the cuffs. She approached slowly, the grass cool beneath her bare feet. "You always come here in the evenings." He didn't look up. "Only when the day's been long." She stopped beside him. "What makes a day long for you?" "Thinking too much." "About what?" He tossed another stone. "It skipped 3 times before sinking. How quiet it was before you came, how I thought that was peace. And now, I still have quiet, but it's different." He laughs. "You hum when you cook. It settles something in me." Zadie looked down at the water, her heart tight in her chest. "I used to hum to keep from crying. I didn't realize I still did it. It suits you." She sat beside him, her skirt brushing his leg. The river moved slow and wide beside them, and the air smelled of moss and dusk. "I'm not good at soft things," she said. "Not gentle words, not trusting easy. I keep waiting to be sent away." "You're not going anywhere." She looked at him fully then. "You sure?" He turned toward her, his hand resting on the grass between them. "I've never been more sure of anything." Zadie reached over, her fingers brushing his. "Then let me stay." Isaiah's hand closed around hers, firm and warm. "You already have," he said. The first frost came before the leaves had fully turned, dusting the pasture in a thin white veil by dawn. Zadie wrapped Vance in his wool coat and watched his breath puff out as he crouched near the woodpile, stacking bark chips while Isaiah sharpened the drawknife beside him. The boy's cheeks had filled in again, and his silence had given way to small, curious questions he asked under his breath, as though still testing the safety of his voice. Zadie had begun to move through the days with rhythm instead of urgency. She knew where the flour sack hung, how to check the trapline near the creek bend, when to feed the old sorrel mare, and how to read the way Isaiah's shoulders shifted when a storm was coming. Still, there were things between them not yet named, quiet spaces held with care, not fear. That afternoon she found Isaiah in the root cellar, bent over the potato bins with a ledger open on his knee. "You keep records for everything?" she asked, stepping down the ladder, her hands dusted with cornmeal. He didn't look up. "Only what I plan to make last." She leaned against the beam, watching him sort the smaller potatoes into a separate basket. "You expect a long winter?" Hard to say. Soil's dry deeper than it ought to be. Elk came down from the ridges earlier than usual. "Is there enough for us?" "Yes." "Might need to trade for oats come January." She hesitated before stepping closer. "Do you barter nearby?" "Nearest ranch is a day west. I ride out every few weeks." "Why?" "I could go with you, help carry, learn the way." He glanced up. "That's something you want." "I want to know how to keep this going, not just live in it." He studied her for a beat, then nodded. "We'll ride out after the next rain. Roads soften just enough, make the trail easier on the horses." She crouched beside him then, reaching for a sprouting root. "You ever think about planting more next spring?" "I was thinking of fencing the west slope. Soil's richer there." She smiled faintly. "I know how to weave willow for wattle walls. Learned it from a Métis woman who traded baskets for eggs." He looked down at her hand, resting against the basket rim. "You'd build something here? If I stay, I want to add to what you've made, not just take shelter under it." Isaiah's voice was quiet. "You're already adding more than you know." She didn't answer right away. Her thumb traced the edge of a cracked potato. "I used to think I'd never belong anywhere that didn't need me for something. Not really. You belong here because you're you." "Not because of the work." Zadie looked at him, her eyes steady. "Then let me stay because I want to, not because I have to." He reached over, touching her wrist with a gentleness that came from truth, not caution. "You're not here out of need anymore. You're here because we're better with you." That night, Zadie sat by the hearth while Vance lined up small pebbles along the edge of the rug. Isaiah carved a handle for the ash shovel, his knife moving slow and precise. Outside, wind stirred the shutters, but inside it was warm enough that no one spoke of the cold. "You think he remembers much?" Isaiah asked, nodding toward the boy. Zadie shook her head. "He remembers enough to be careful. But not so much he's afraid to laugh. That's something. I want him to grow up with more than silence." "He will. You've already given him that." She looked toward the boy, then back to Isaiah. "You've given it to both of us." Isaiah set the carved handle down and leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "I was alone a long time, Zadie, got used to only my own voice. Now I hear yours in the morning, and it feels like something I was missing." She felt her breath catch, not from surprise but from recognition. "I don't know what comes next," she said, "but I want to build it with you, not just stay in place. Grow something real." Isaiah took her hand, his thumb brushing the edge of her palm. "Then let's start, not with promises, not with declarations, just the quiet, steady clasp of two hands that had known work and now knew something worth holding." A week after the first frost, the clouds thickened low over the hills, and the wind shifted with the smell of oncoming snow. Zadie pressed the heel of her hand into the cool glass of the cabin window and watched Isaiah ride the ridge trail with Vance perched in front of him, the boy's arms looped tight around his middle. The horse moved slow, sure-footed on the damp path. She let her palm rest there a moment longer, then turned back to the stove. Inside, the cabin held a hush broken only by the crackle of kindling. She set the kettle over the flame and reached for the jar of dried rose hips Isaiah had brought down from the high meadow 2 days earlier. He'd handed them to her without ceremony, just said, "They'll keep you well," and gone back to oiling his saddle. But she'd caught the look in his eyes when he said it, not worry exactly, but something close. By the time they returned, Vance's cheeks were ruddy from wind and Isaiah's coat was freckled with melt. Zadie took the boy's hands in hers, checking for chill. "You warm enough," Vance nodded, then tugged off his mittens and reached for the tin cup on the table. "He let me hold the reins for a little." Zadie glanced at Isaiah. He met her look without hesitation. "He's got good balance." Vance climbed onto the bench and started poking at the crust of bread left from breakfast. Isaiah unbuckled his belt knife and hung it beside the door, then stepped close enough to speak low. "Trail's muddy all the way to the valley. We'll wait another day before heading west." Zadie nodded. "I can stitch the saddle bags tonight." "One's splitting at the seam." He studied her face for a beat. "You sleeping all right?" "I sleep better when I know where he is. And you?" That earned a quiet sound from his throat, more breath than voice. He shifted his weight, then reached for the kettle. "You ever been through Swan Valley?" he asked. "No. First time I rode it, I was 19. Thought I'd never seen anything greener. Pines thick as soldiers, lake clear enough to see the stones at the bottom." "What were you chasing then?" He poured the steeped water into 3 cups. "A place to call mine. I hadn't found it yet." She wrapped her hands around the warm tin. "And now," he looked at her steady, "now I have." Zadie didn't drop her eyes. "I'd like to see it." "You will." They shared the tea in quiet, the boy humming under his breath as he stacked crumbs into a tower. As the light faded, Isaiah took down the lantern and lit it with his flint, shadows dancing up the beams. Later, after Vance had curled beneath his quilt, Zadie joined Isaiah outside. The wind had calmed some, and the stars showed through the cloud breaks. He was sitting on the porch rail, one boot braced against the post, the other dangling above the step. "I saw a bear once," she said, stepping beside him. "Near Billings, I was maybe 15. It didn't see me. I was up in a tree, hiding from something else." He looked over. "What were you hiding from?" "3 men who thought I owed them something. I didn't." Isaiah didn't ask more. Instead, he shifted and patted the rail beside him. She sat, careful of the splinters. "I've been thinking," he said, "about spring, about what might come next." Her fingers tightened in her lap. "Go on." "There's a parcel east of here, good ground. I never put seed in it, but there's water and sun enough. I've got a second plow. If we cleared it together, we could plant more than I manage on my own." She turned to face him fully. "You mean, stay, make it ours?" He nodded. "If that's what you want." Her throat tightened. "What I want is to stop watching the road, to stop wondering if we'll be turned away again. I want Vance to wake up knowing we're not leaving." Isaiah reached for her hand, slow, giving her time. When she didn't pull back, he laced his fingers with hers. "I don't want this alone," he said. "You don't." They sat like that until the lantern inside flickered low. When they finally rose, he held the door for her and her hand brushed his chest as she passed. Neither spoke of it, but something settled between them, unspoken, not uncertain. That night, as the wind picked up again and the trees groaned against it, Isaiah left the door between the rooms open. Zadie could hear his steady breathing across the dark, and for the first time since the hills, she slept without waking. By the time the snow laid a full hand's depth across the pasture, Zadie had learned the weight of a winter morning, how the cold bit through the shutters before sunrise, how the woodpile dwindled faster than expected, and how Isaiah's quiet presence filled a room even when he said nothing at all. She stood in the cabin's smaller room, needle in hand, finishing the last of Vance's patched shirts. He'd outgrown more in a month than she expected, and she'd taken to letting the hems down in the evenings while Isaiah read aloud from the dog-eared almanac. Vance had asked once if they'd always stay here. She hadn't answered then. But now, as she folded the shirt and set it atop the others, she knew her answer. Outside, Isaiah moved steadily through the snow, dragging a sled toward the barn. It had been his idea to lash the feed sacks that way to save the horse's legs. She watched him pause mid-step and glance toward the window, catching her looking. He didn't wave. He only nodded once and kept going. Later, as the sun reached its thin arc overhead, she joined him in the barn. The air inside was warmer than she expected, thick with the smell of hay and leather. Isaiah stood near the far stall, checking the gelding's hooves. "I thought you could use a second pair of hands," she said. He turned, brushing straw from his sleeve. "Always." She crossed to the saddle rack, unbuckling the cracked strap she meant to mend. "You ever think about what you'd have done if we hadn't come down off that ridge?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he rewrapped the horse's leg and stood. "I think I'd have kept living the way I was. One day at a time, but I wouldn't have called that a life." She looked at him then, carefully. "And now I think about things I never let myself before. What spring might feel like with voices in the yard, what it means to build a future that's not just mine." Zadie set the strap aside. "I used to think survival was the best I could hope for, that wanting more was dangerous." "It can be," he said, "but it's not wrong." She stepped closer. "I want more now." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her temple. "Then take it." She leaned into his hand. "I want to raise Vance here. I want to plant those fields with you. I want to wake up and know what peace feels like." Isaiah's voice was steady. "Then we'll do all of it." That night, after the lamps were turned low and Vance had fallen asleep beside his wooden soldiers, Zadie and Isaiah stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching snow fall in slow, heavy flakes. She leaned against the frame and he stood close enough that their shoulders touched. "I didn't think I'd ever belong anywhere," she said. "You do," he replied. She turned to him. "Say it plain, Isaiah." He looked at her, his eyes holding hers without faltering. "I love you, Zadie." She swallowed hard. "I love you too." He kissed her then, not quick and not uncertain, but with a quiet promise in it. The cold hung around them, but neither felt it. Spring came slowly, as it always did in the Montana territory. Ice melted in thin, glistening sheets off the barn roof. The earth softened. Vance ran barefoot in the thawed mud behind the house, chasing the stray chicken Isaiah had traded for in Swan Valley. Zadie planted beans in neat rows, her hands confident in the soil. Isaiah built a second room onto the cabin, with a broad window facing east. He carved her a stool for the hearth, and she sewed him a new shirt with the last of the blue calico she'd brought from Fort Benton. They were married one quiet morning under the cottonwood by the creek, with Vance holding the ring in his small, careful hands. No preacher came, just them and the land and the life they had chosen, years past. The fields grew thick with barley and squash. Vance grew taller, steadier, his laughter louder. He called Isaiah Pa without thinking, and Zadie found herself humming again, not to keep sorrow at bay, but because joy had rooted deep. In the end, there was never a gate to shut behind them, never a past that needed forgetting. Just the sound of wind in the grass, the rhythm of footsteps in a home they'd built together, and the quiet certainty that they had all come through the long dark and into the light together. Always.